Hey guys, what's up? Producer engineer Alex Scott here with Consordini.com. Thanks so much for tuning in to check out another studio gear review. Today we are taking a look at my adorable little friend here, the TC Electronic DVR250 Digital Vintage Reverb. Now, this unit is brand new. I was lucky enough to receive one of the very first commercially available batches of this little guy, and I am thrilled with him so far. Now, the DVR250 is kind of a companion unit from the same series as the TC2290, which we've also done a video about here on the channel. And like I said in that video, you know, this is such a cool form factor for gear that I'm really pleased that TC Electronic is making these units. So basically what they are, if you haven't seen the video on the 2290, they are hardware controlled plugins, okay? So the 2290 was a delay. This is now a recreation of a classic digital reverb. Namely, it is a recreation of the EMT 250. Now, EMT is a very old company in the audio world. They're arguably most famous for the EMT 140, which was a plate reverb. Now, this unit, if you guys have ever used a reverb, you know, like a pedal or a reverb plugin or something, you'll see settings called plate reverb. And if you've always been curious what that refers to, most of them are modeling something like the EMT 140 or something similar to it. The EMT 140 was the best known plate reverb at the time and is still to this day. Basically what a plate reverb is it's not unlike a spring reverb, where in a spring reverb you have you know, a little speaker or a driver attached to a spring, and then you've got basically a microphone at the other end of the spring, and as the driver sends signal, the spring reverberates and creates reverb. Well, plate reverb was the same thing basically, but much bigger, and instead of using springs, they used plates of typically steel. Sometimes other metals were used as well. But an original EMT 140 is like, you know, 8 feet long, 5 feet high, weighs about 600 pounds, something like that. They were massive units, and inside they would have this huge steel plate, hence the name, and they would have drivers on one end and then a pair of piezo microphones on the other end. And you would send signal into the drivers, they would reverberate this massive steel plate, and then the piezos would pick it up at the other end. Very cool product. EMT made the 140 for many years and was incredibly successful with it. But come the early 70s, mid 70s, late 70s, we started to see the first incarnations of digital recording equipment, digital audio equipment, and EMT was one of the very first companies to create a digital reverb, okay, and this was called the EMT 250. Now, the original EMT 250 was this massive kind of tower-like unit with these really crazy levers on the top of it that you'd use to alter different parameters. And even though it was the very first time anybody had tried to make a digital reverb, or one of the very first times, it really sounded great. It quickly gained a reputation for being a really versatile unit, having a really unique and very useful sound overall, and actually being able to sound, at least for the time, quite realistic to the spaces that it was trying to emulate. Because they had figured out how to do digital reverberation, they were no longer worried about, you know, kind of using a plate reverb sound or a spring reverb sound. They actually started to try to emulate real physical spaces that would create reverb. That was kind of the impetus of the whole thing, to move from these physical hardware devices into having digital processing handle your reverb. So that was the EMT 250. It was one of the first digital reverbs ever made. And TC Electronic took that idea. You know, the originals, of course, nowadays are very difficult to find. They're very expensive and incredibly difficult to get serviced if anything goes wrong. So TC took that idea and packaged it, recreated it in a plugin. But instead of just doing what everybody else is doing and having everything just be a plugin, and you got to sit there and you got to click and all this stuff, which you guys know how much I hate clicking on things at this point, TC has bundled it into their Icon series of hardware-controlled plugins. So you have this little box right here. We're going to move the camera over in just a second, take a closer look at it. But it's a little box that even has levers that are very reminiscent of the original EMT 250 unit, but it's a super convenient little desktop package that actually controls all the elements of the plugins. So you have physical control over a reverb plugin, essentially, which is incredibly handy. It makes your workflow incredibly fast. You know, again, just like the 2290, which is the TC 2290, the classic delay rack unit, this is a physical emulation of that. This is a physical emulation of the EMT 250. And, you know, I love the convenience of it. I love the form factor of it. I love having physical control over a reverb. But I also really just genuinely love how the plugin sounds. Even if it were just a plugin, I'd be tempted to use it all the time because it is a fabulous sounding reverb. Now, I've never had the personal pleasure of hearing an original EMT 250, but from everything I've read, everything that I've heard, this thing does a pretty fantastic job of faithfully recreating the tone of the original unit. So let's go ahead, take our camera, scoot it over here a little bit, and we'll give you a screenshot as well so you guys can see the plugin in action, and we'll hear how this thing sounds. Okay, guys, so here we have our TC DVR250 desktop reverb plugin hardware controller. Wacky little box. This thing can do so much. I'm really excited to go over some of the features with you guys. Okay, so when you very first open up the plugin, which you can also see here on screen, this is kind of the plugin side of things. You're presented with the preset ballad vocal. This is just a really solid, even reverb that you can use for most purposes. But of course, because you have the hardware controls, it's infinitely tweakable, okay? So we have a couple different options. This right here is gonna switch you between bypass and in, that's reverb. And then also when you move to using some of the other effects, that's gonna get you back to reverb if you wanna switch the plugin back to reverb mode as opposed to any of these other modes. Now we're gonna demo those in a second, but first I'm gonna look at the main attraction, which is the reverb, its sound, and the basic features. So the main kind of reverb layout is right here, and we have reverb time, high and low decay, which will affect the high and low frequency response of the verb, and then pre-delay amount, okay? Now, when we hit set, it's going to kind of do a second overlay or move to the second overlay. And you'll see here on the plugin, when I do that, you can see that your lever status here is going to change to reflect what you're looking at. And now, instead of decay time, we're looking at the mix level of the verb, modulation amount, if any, and then your output select. It does have a transformer output, or a transformer modeled output if you want just a little bit of extra vintage grit or girth to your sound, or you can take that out and go transformerless, quote unquote. Okay, so I've got an acoustic guitar track pulled up here, and we're just going to listen to it dry for a minute, and then we'll kick in the verb. Again, you can see these really handy meters up here, great feature. All right, let's bring in the verb. Really, really nice sounding reverb, just all on its own. And of course, all that's editable. That was at 3.5 seconds or 3.6 seconds of decay. We can bring it back for a little bit tighter, maybe pull back any modulation, and maybe give it a little bit more in the mix. Really nice stereo image, and it definitely has a vintage vibe to it. Not overly so, but just, you know, a little bit of that classic old school feel. I love it. Now, this reverb is not the only thing that can be done here, though. We have some other options. We have a delay, and you can see when I enter delay mode by hitting this DEL key here, our lever status on the plugin is going to change again. Now we have different options for inputting the time for the delay, and of course, same thing, the mix. The delay also sounds fantastic. Really nice for kind of a slapback. It has an almost tape delay kind of a feel to it, which I really, really like. Next up, we have phaser, which is really, really, really simple. And you can change the kind of degree of phasing that's going on here. And then, of course, the mix. And you can hear as we move through the curve, as they call it, or the angle of phase, You can get different tones that way. Next up is a chorus, which is a really great sounding chorus, and we've got options for pre-delay, modulation, how wide the chorus ensemble is, 1, 2, 3, or 4. Okay, and then over here, of course, we have mix. So go up to a 4-voice ensemble there. Really nice and wide. Okay, then we have a classic echo, which this is really, really great for real slapbacky, you know, kind of 50s vibe. Really, really nice echo sound. And then finally, we have space, or SPC, this last button here. And this one does not really have any parameters except for pre-delay and mix. But this is TC's answer to like the Eventide Black Hole or any other really huge ambient sounding reverb. You can hear that massively long decay that just hangs and hangs and hangs. This is excellent for anything you need ambience on. You know, synthesizers, keyboard parts, you know, really high, like arpeggiated guitar stuff. This sounds great on. It's just going to give you that really expansive, never-ending reverb sound. That's great, you know, again, for like ambient production or cinematic stuff or electronica, anything like that. This is going to be your go-to setting for this. I do wish they kind of provided more options on space so you could pull the decay time out even further. I mean, I definitely, if I'm doing like film scoring stuff, sometimes I will set up my reverb to run for 20 seconds, you know, of decay or 30 seconds because I want something to just epically, you know, kind of go out and out and out and out and never really end. It seems, I think it sounds to me like a 7 to 10 second decay, which is great, and the tone of it is really, really nice. But I do wish they provided a few more options there. All of the, you know, these switches feel really, really solid. The buttons feel really solid. Nice aluminum faceplate. My only physical gripe with the unit is that it is so tiny that sometimes if I do jump over here a little bit too quickly and I start, you know, really doing stuff, as you can see, it has a tendency to scoot around a tiny little bit. It does have really nice rubberized feet on the bottom, which helps a ton, but it is just such a little small device that it does have a hard time staying in place. I have definitely considered getting like some tack or tape of some kind, or maybe Velcro, to help stick it down a little bit firmer. I might do that at some point. It's really not that big of a deal, though. You know, that's if I come over here and I'm doing my thing and then maybe it gets scooted to there. You know, it's certainly not unusable, and just a quick little tweak, and it's back to exactly where I want it. Okay, guys, so there you go. The TC Electronic DVR250 Digital Vintage Reverb. I love this thing. I think it sounds great. You know, I just got it pretty recently, so I don't have a ton of hands-on time with it. But from what I have used of it so far, it just sounds really, really, really good and really brings a great vintage vibe to anything that you're trying to do. Because this is an older reverb design, you know, again, something from the, I believe the late 70s is when the original EMT 250 came out. Because it's from that era, it definitely gives you the vibe of a lot of stuff that was produced in that era. So if you find yourself working on a lot of projects where you're trying to emulate anything from like the 80s, you know, if you're a fan of like Prince and Genesis and all that kind of stuff, this reverb was pretty critical in those times. You know, that's the sound of a lot of the records that you probably love had this unit on them at some point, or the original unit on them at some point in the recording or mixing process. And to have such a cool piece of vintage gear emulated so accurately in a plugin, but then also tied to this really fun, cool, convenient hardware control unit, it's just a really, really great solution. You know, when they first came out with the 2290, this guy over here, which again, we've done a video about here on the channel, I was really looking forward to them releasing more units in this kind of Icon series, as they're calling it, in this form factor, because it integrates so well with my workflow. If you guys have seen the video that we've done on the Icon QCon Pro X or on the Softtube Console 1, you'll know how much I love having physical control over the digital domain. It's a huge part of my personal workflow as a mixing and mastering engineer. And it just makes everything faster. It makes everything more convenient. And I love the idea of marrying the ease of use and recallability of plugins with the kind of tactile satisfaction and inspiration that comes from using great classic hardware units. And these are just such a cool, unique approach to that problem. And I really, really hope that TC, they haven't announced any other new ones anytime recently, but I really hope that they continue to make all different kinds of effects in this form factor, because I guarantee you I will collect them all. They do have one other reverb that's a little kind of even half as wide as this one, so it's an even smaller unit. And then they have a stereo imaging unit that is in that same, really, really narrow little form factor. I'd love to pick those up at some point, and I'm sure if and when I do, we will do videos on those as well. But I would love to see TC do maybe a compressor or an EQ or, any number of things in this form factor. I would really be tempted to buy pretty much as they can make, just because it integrates so well into my workflow. It's so easy to work with, and it's really inspiring to use. Again, there's something just more personal and tactile. Even though it is a plugin, there's just something that feels better about actually sitting here and manipulating these switches and really getting it to do what you want to do. And you feel like you kind of have to learn where all the features are instead of just, browsing presets or something. It really encourages you to get hands-on with sculpting the tone that you're looking for. So I'm a huge fan. They retail right now for $350. I'm sure you'll pretty quickly be able to find them on the secondhand market in the next couple months, 6 months, something like that, for a little bit cheaper. I'm sure people are going to run specials on them. But I think it's a fair price point, given that you'll be owning the plugin alongside that, and you're paying for a really high quality, well-built control unit. I think it's great. I think it's great value for money. But what do you guys think about this new TC Electronics stuff? Have you heard this or the 2290 or either of the other two units they've released as part of this series? What do you think of them? Do you think they're a cool idea? I know a lot of people are really dissatisfied with the fact that you have to have the unit in order to control the plugin, and you can't access all the features of the reverb from within the plugin. And I hear that, it's not the most convenient thing in the world for a lot of guys who are on the go. But, again, as you guys can see from my setup and have seen in lots of the other videos I've done, I'm not exactly one to pick up a lot of this stuff and go out into the world. I've built the studio so that I can work here and not have to rely on other studios. So it's not as big of an issue for me to leave these plugged in all the time and just use them. So I know some people are dissatisfied with that, but for me, it's not really a problem. But in any case, let us know what you think of these units in the comments down below. We would love to hear you guys' thoughts and opinions. If you like them, if you don't like them, whatever you have to add to the conversation. Again, my name is Alex Scott with Consordini.com. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to another one of our gear reviews, and I will see you in the next video.